Clara had long stopped counting the days since she buried Taza by the river that year. There was no calendar on the wall, no clock in the house, just the rise of the sun, the call of birds in the late afternoon, and the kind of winter cold that froze the stream solid. Time didn't pass out here. It settled, like dust on stone, and Clara, in the hush of this land, had learned how to stand, not because anyone told her to, but because there was no one else to lean on. Her home was a rough wooden lodge she and Taza had built together, nestled beneath tall pines and red canyon walls. The night wind whispered through the cracks in the boards, sometimes sounding like the land itself was breathing. This place was wild, but not cruel. It held memory. And for Clara, every step across the dry ground brought back a piece of a love that never truly left. River, the daughter of Clara and Taza, was the one light that remained after the storm. She was 5 now, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's quiet strength. Clara often said River didn't cry loud, didn't fuss. She watched before she spoke, moved carefully, as if a fire lived quietly in her chest, waiting for the right wind to rise. Each morning started with the first touch of light. Clara would stoke the fire, boil water in an old iron pot, and wake River with the smell of cornbread or roasted yam. After breakfast, they'd go outside. Clara would mend the fence, patch the roof, sharpen tools, split wood. River would gather kindling and learn how to recognize healing plants. Life wasn't glamorous. There was no electricity, no store-bought convenience. But Clara never felt poor. She had hands that could build, a mind that could solve, and a heart that had learned not to wait for help that wasn't coming. Everything she needed was right here, in the sound of the river and the warmth of the firelight. No one called to check in. No letters came, and Clara didn't expect them to. She used to be a city girl. Heels, etiquette, polite conversation. All of that faded the day she chose to leave that world behind and follow the man the outside world had called other. Taza, a quiet Apache with eyes like midnight, had loved her slowly and fully. Like a river carving stone. He hadn't needed many words. Every gesture was deliberate. When he died, the tribe thought she would leave. But she didn't, because this wasn't just where Taza died, it was where their love had lived. That first winter alone, Clara had to learn how to chop wood in the snow, keep a fire burning all night, and stop her fingers from bleeding when she split rocks to find clean water. Once, River burned with fever for 3 days straight, and Clara held her all night, whispering old lullabies until her voice went hoarse. When the fever broke, Clara cried, but just once, then rose to build the fire like she always did. Spring brought planting, squash, beans, sunflowers along the lodge walls. Clara taught River which plants healed and how to trap rabbits using twine and sap. Things she once believed impossible had become second nature. Tasks that once took 2 people, she now did alone, with a child beside her who watched and remembered. Some evenings, Clara would sit on the old wooden step, gazing out across the valley. River would lie in her lap, clutching the small carved bird Taza once made. They didn't speak. There was only the wind in the grass, the soft rustle of trees, and the steady beat of a mother's heart, strong like a drum far away. Once, a passing traveler stopped to ask for water. He looked at Clara and said, "You live out here alone?" She only smiled, because she had never felt alone the way others meant it. Out here, among memory and sky and soil. She wasn't lonely. She was simply living a life that didn't look like theirs. And that, for Clara, was enough. Clara wasn't one for storytelling. But sometimes, when River asked about her father, she'd speak, not in tragedy, but in reverence. She told River that her father hadn't disappeared. He only changed places, from my hands to your heart. And River would nod, as if she understood, though she didn't yet have all the words for loss. But Clara knew. Children raised on real love always understand, in ways grown-ups can't explain. On star-filled nights, Clara would look up at the sky and think, I didn't run. I didn't break. And on this harsh land, where summer burns and winter bites, she had grown something rarer than gold, a quiet peace from within. It was the 7th evening of the spring rains when Clara first saw him, just as the sun began to slip behind the canyon ridge and the fire beside her crackled with river-damp wood. She had been kneeling near the flame, fingers still wet from scrubbing River's tunic in the stream. When the sound of hooves broke the stillness, a man rode slowly into the clearing, leading a lean paint horse and carrying only a modest pack. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, still as the pines, eyes steady and unreadable. A jagged scar ran down the side of his face, partially hidden beneath a long braid threaded with copper beads. Clara's heart lurched, not out of fear, but from the strange familiarity in the way he held himself, like someone who had walked this path before. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and formal. "I am Gohan, son of Winato, brother to Taza. I come for his blood." Clara stood slowly, her body stiff, every bone alert. River peeked from the cabin doorway behind her, thumb hooked into the hem of her mother's shawl. Clara placed a protective hand on her child's back, though her gaze never left the stranger. "Taza never spoke of a brother," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Even inside, though, her mind raced. Why now? Why after 5 years of silence? Gohan's eyes flicked to River, then back to Clara. "He would not have," he replied, "but I dreamed of him. He called me to the boy." Clara's throat tightened. She didn't know what to believe, whether this man spoke truth or was just another traveler looking to claim something that wasn't his. Her life had been built carefully, brick by brick, in silence and in sweat. She wouldn't let anyone knock it down. Still, something deeper than logic stirred. He hadn't come armed. His horse was worn, his posture respectful. And dreams? She had lived long enough out here to know that dreams sometimes carried messages older than memory. When Gohan said, "Blood calls to blood, widow, I came to see what was left behind," Clara didn't answer, not right away. She simply stood at the threshold with River pressed to her leg and let the silence settle between them like falling dusk. She didn't invite him in that night, not out of hostility, but because she needed time. Time to feel what his presence stirred. Time to measure the weight of his voice against the ghost of Taza's. Instead, she pointed him to the old lean-to by the cedar trees. "You'll find shelter from the wind there," she said, her tone curt but not cold. That first night, Clara barely slept. Every creak of the trees, every shift of the wind sounded like questions she didn't know how to answer. But in the morning, Gohan was still there. She found him crouched beside the creek, folding leaves into small boats for River, who stood watching him with wide-eyed curiosity. Something about that image caught in Clara's chest, the child's quiet ease, the man's patience, the way he didn't try to explain himself. Over the next few days, Gohan remained, not as a guest but as a presence. He didn't push, he didn't speak of Taza again. Instead, he helped gather firewood, offered to mend the broken canoe by the riverbank, swept the lodge step without being asked. He fit into the rhythm of their days with surprising grace, like a missing stitch that somehow closed a seam Clara hadn't realized was still open. At first, Clara watched him with caution. Every action was measured, every moment observed, but it was hard to hold on to suspicion in the face of his quiet steadiness. He didn't try to win her trust. He just was there, in the way he lifted River onto his shoulders when her feet tired, in the way he sharpened her tools without a word, in the way he hummed Apache lullabies while stirring the stew. One evening, Clara asked him directly, "What do you want from us?" They were sitting near the fire, River asleep inside. Gohan didn't flinch. His answer was simple, honest. "I came for the child," he said, "but I stayed for something else, something I didn't expect to find still alive in this place." Her breath caught at that, not because it was romantic, but because it was true. Clara hadn't felt seen in years, not really. The world had always looked at her as either fragile or foolish. But Gohan looked at her like she mattered, like her silence meant something, like her scars were part of a story worth knowing. Still, she held back. She had buried Taza with her own hands. She had built a life from ash and ache. She didn't owe anyone her heart, no matter how gently they knocked. Then came the storm. It rolled in faster than expected, lightning crackling over the mesa, thunder shaking the walls, rain pouring through the patched roof like the sky had split open. River screamed in fear, her small body trembling in Clara's arms. And Gohan was there. He moved without panic, grabbing old hides and sealing the leaks, then hurrying to Clara's side. He crouched in the corner with them, his arm steady around both mother and child. In the dark, his voice low and calm, he sang an old Apache song that Taza had once murmured into her hair. And something broke inside Clara, not in pain, but in release. She let herself lean into that warmth. Just a little, just long enough to feel that she wasn't alone anymore. When the storm passed, and River drifted into sleep between them, Gohan didn't move away. He simply said, "You are stronger than you know. But you don't have to carry it all alone." The words didn't open her heart completely, but they pressed gently on the door. In the days that followed, Gohan remained by their side, not as a replacement for Taza, but as something else entirely. A man who had come for blood, but stayed for love. A man who understood that the deepest kind of loyalty didn't need to be loud. And Clara, though not yet ready to name what had grown between them, knew one thing clearly: his presence no longer felt like an intrusion. It felt like coming home. Clara had always known there would come a day when she would have to let River belong to something more than just her. For 5 years, it had only been the two of them, mother and daughter, anchored in the quiet steadiness of survival. But when Kale arrived, another brother of Taza, younger and unfamiliar, something in Clara shifted. She sensed it before he even spoke. He came from the north, lean and quiet, with sharp cheekbones and the same kind eyes she had once seen in Taza by firelight. He did not demand entry. He simply stood, palms open, and said, "I came to find my brother's daughter." At first, Clara bristled with caution. She was not accustomed to men appearing and making claims, even soft-spoken ones. But Kale's presence didn't feel like a claim, it felt like a return. Like a forgotten thread tying River not just to the man who gave her life, but to the people who had shaped him. Over a small supper of beans and cornbread, Kale shared his reason. Taza was meant to be a firekeeper, he said gently, his gaze shifting toward River, who played quietly with a carved bird under the table. He was to become a bridge between tongues, between bloods, but his time ended too soon. And we want the girl to know where she comes from, to carry the fire he never got to pass. Clara felt something ache in her chest, not pain, but a kind of gravity, a knowing. River was already so much like her father. The way she observed before she spoke, the way she never cried without reason. The child was quiet strength wrapped in soft skin. But Clara had never taught her about ceremony, about the names passed down like feathers and flame. And now, the chance stood before them. "She can come to the council fire next moon," Kale said, "if you allow it. If she chooses, the elders who remember Taza will be there. She can be named in his tongue." Gohan, who had sat silently through much of the conversation, finally stirred. "And if we say no?" he asked, his voice firm but not unkind. Kale met his gaze without flinching. "Then I leave with thanks, and carry her name in my prayers anyway." That night, Clara sat by the creek with River in her lap. The moon hung low and full above the pines, and the wind carried the scent of cedar and old stories. River hummed softly, running her fingers through the water. She looked up at her mother and said, "Is Daddy still in the stars?" Clara nodded. "Yes, and maybe in your heart, too. Can he hear me if I talk? I think he's always listening." River went quiet for a moment, then whispered, "I want to meet him. The part of me that's like him." Clara's heart swelled with something tender and strong. The decision was made. Blank. Blank. The following weeks moved like ceremony before the ceremony, quiet, deliberate. Clara helped River choose a dress the color of soft earth. Kale showed her how to braid her hair in the Apache style. Gohan built the fire ring near the ravine, where the canyon curved like an open palm, as if the land itself awaited this moment. On the night of the naming, the air was still but expectant. Stars blinked awake one by one, and the clearing glowed with lanterns and firelight. River walked between Clara and Gohan, her small hand wrapped around a sprig of wildflowers. When they reached the fire, 3 figures sat waiting. Kale, an older woman with silver threaded through her braid, and a man wrapped in elk hide whose eyes looked carved from time itself. "She comes willingly?" the elder asked in Apache, and Kale translated. Clara looked down at her daughter, whose face was solemn but fearless. River gave a small nod, then stepped forward alone. Kale knelt in the firelight, unwrapping a bundle from his lap. Inside were 3 objects: a smooth river stone, a carved wooden bird, and a feather black with a silver tip. His voice carried the cadence of tradition. Words passed like fire from mouth to mouth. River, daughter of Taza, do you accept your name in the old tongue? Will you carry it between the 2 paths that made you? River reached out, touched the stone, then the feather, then the bird. She looked back at her mother, her eyes steady, her mouth in a soft smile, and said clearly, yes. Clara's throat tightened. She blinked away tears but didn't hide them. Gohan stepped forward then and placed a thin leather necklace over River's head. It held a pendant, bone and turquoise shaped into a flame. Kale whispered, your father carved this before he left for his final journey. He didn't say why. Now we know. River stood taller as the elder lifted her hands in blessing. The fire behind her flickered like it bowed in agreement. From the edge of the clearing, Clara watched it all unfold, her heart full in a way it had never been before. It wasn't grief. It wasn't loss. It was pride. River wasn't just her daughter now. She was her father's legacy. She was the flame that didn't die with him. The bridge he never got to build, but that still stood. Through her. As the ceremony ended, River returned to her mother's side. She leaned into Clara's warmth and said softly, did I do it right? Clara kissed her forehead. You did it perfect, my flame. Later that night, when the fire had turned to embers and the stars hung low, Clara sat beside Gohan just beyond the circle. She's not just mine anymore. She whispered. No, he said. She's ours. Yours. His. Theirs. She's everything that made her. Clara nodded, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was giving something up. She felt like she was giving something forward. River had been named, not just as her daughter, but as the flame carrier. And in her new name, Clara saw the future, lit with love, memory, and belonging. It began as nothing more than a small, dry cough, barely enough to stir worry. Clara had been tying bundles of dried herbs when River, her daughter, let out a weak little hack and rubbed her nose. The air was cool that morning, the kind that lingered in the hollows long after the sun had risen. Clara thought it might be dust in the throat, or a restless night's sleep. But by sundown, River was lying beneath the deerhide blanket, her skin hot to the touch, her breath shallow and fast. Panic came slowly at first, like a fog creeping across her chest. Clara pressed her hand to the girl's forehead, then her chest, then back to her own heart as if willing the rhythm of her life into her daughter's. Gohan, she called, voice sharp, nearly breaking. He appeared in the doorway within seconds, followed by Kale, both men snapping into motion without a single question. Gohan fetched water from the stream while Kale knelt beside the bed, his fingers brushing River's hair back with surprising gentleness. Clara tried to remember what Taza's aunt had taught her. She crushed leaves, boiled roots, reached for poultices in cloth-wrapped jars. But her hands trembled, her vision blurred. It was happening again, that awful, unstoppable thing. The thing where you love someone so fiercely that the very idea of losing them tears your soul into shreds. She's burning, Clara whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. She's too small to carry this. She's strong, Gohan said calmly, handing her a cloth soaked in cool water. Like her mother. But Clara didn't feel strong. She felt like she was drowning. River moaned softly in her sleep, a sound that cracked something inside her mother. Clara sat by her daughter's side, dipping the cloth again and again, her lips moving in prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood. Words from her mother's world, her world before the lodge and the canyon and the firekeeper she had once loved. Don't take her, she whispered. Please, don't take her. Kale lit the lamp and laid fresh wood in the hearth. Gohan crushed bark and mixed it with honey. They worked together like they had done this before, like they didn't need to ask each other what came next. Clara, overwhelmed, found herself surrounded by a calm that didn't belong to her, but held her all the same. They didn't try to tell her not to worry. They didn't offer platitudes or pretend to know the ending. They just stayed, and somehow, that steadiness felt like more than comfort. It felt like a wall around her collapsing heart. All through the night, they took shifts at River's side. Gohan whispered songs in Apache while pressing warm cloth to her chest. Kale stirred broth over the fire, adding pinches of medicine only the old people up north still remembered. Clara sat by her daughter's side, holding her small, burning hand in both of hers, whispering over and over, "Stay with me, baby, stay with me." The fever raged for 2 days. During those hours, Clara barely left the bedside. Her body ached from tension. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. But her soul, the part that had already buried one love, refused to surrender again. And then, just before dawn on the third morning, River stirred. Her little fingers curled slightly around Clara's thumb. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy and dazed but aware. And then, miracle of miracles, she breathed out one small word. "Mama." Clara collapsed forward, her forehead resting against River's. Tears spilling freely now, not the silent kind, not the dignified kind, but the kind that belongs only to a mother who has wrestled with the edge of grief and clawed her way back. She kissed her daughter's damp hair. Her fingers shook as she smoothed the blanket. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'll always be here." Behind her, Gohan stood quietly by the door, arms folded, watching with eyes that held something like reverence. Kale sat at the fire, head bowed, murmuring something too soft to hear. "You didn't leave her side," Gohan said gently. Clara looked up at him, her voice raw but steady. "I will never leave her. Not for anything." He nodded, and in the flickering morning light, something passed between them, not the beginning of something new. Not yet, but the recognition of a bond that had survived fire. When River finally fell back asleep, her body cooler, her breath steady, Clara stepped outside to breathe for the first time in days. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. The sky was beginning to lighten, thin blue stretched across the black. Promising another day, she stood near the edge of the clearing, arms wrapped around herself, not from cold but from the weight of everything she had just survived. Gohan approached quietly and handed her a mug of warm tea. "You're not alone," he said. Clara looked at him, the words hanging in the air like threads she hadn't known were waiting to be tied. Then she glanced back at the cabin, where Kale was now wrapping River in another blanket, humming softly, as if she were his own. "I don't know what this is," Clara said softly, her voice more vulnerable than she meant it to be. "But it feels like family." "It is," Gohan said, "the kind we choose." Clara nodded slowly. In the days that followed, River recovered, her appetite returned, her color bloomed back into her cheeks. She laughed again, light and bright and full of the life Clara had feared she might lose forever. But something had changed. Not just River, not just Clara, all of them. They began cooking together, planting beans in the softened soil. Gohan repaired the broken fence while Kale carved birds for River to paint. No one spoke of roles or blood or obligation. They simply moved around each other like people who understood the weight of love and the miracle of keeping it alive. Clara knew they weren't replacing what had been lost. Taza would always live in the bend of River's smile, in the lullabies that echoed in the corners of the lodge. But this new fire, was no less real. It was not built on names or birthright. It was built on choice. And it held just as strong. The canyon hadn't changed. Clara knew it before she even saw it. Felt it in the hush of the air. In the way the wind shifted as they approached the river's bend. The wildflowers still bloomed there in spring, yellow and defiant, pushing through the cracks of ancient rock. The same willow tree still leaned slightly toward the water, its roots curled like fingers holding on to memory. It had been 5 years since Clara laid Taza to rest beneath that tree. 5 years since she knelt beside the earth and whispered goodbye into the soil, not knowing if her heart would survive the silence that followed. Now she returned, not alone, but with her daughter in front of her, and 2 men walking beside her, Gohan, steady and protective, and Kale, gentle and rooted in the old ways. River was quiet for most of the journey, clutching the small cedar box to her chest with both hands. Inside was a gift she'd chosen herself, a bundle of feathers tied with red thread, a piece of river stone smoothed by her touch, and the little carved bird Kale had given her the day she received her name. She said she wanted to leave something behind, something that would speak to her father in the wind. They camped the night before at the edge of the ridge. Clara barely slept. She stared into the fire long after the others had drifted off, her thoughts returning to that day, the day she buried the man who taught her how to listen to silence, how to build a life from scratch, How to love without needing to be loud. At dawn, River woke first. I'm ready now, she said. They walked the final stretch as the sky turned gold. The light caught on the canyon walls, throwing long shadows across the path. When they reached the clearing, Clara's breath caught. The spot looked untouched, as if time had curled itself around the grave, guarding it from erosion and memory alike. River stepped forward alone. She knelt by the willow tree and placed the box gently against its roots. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she closed her eyes and whispered something too soft to hear. Clara didn't need to know the words. She could feel them. Grief shaped like gratitude. Farewell woven with legacy. You can rest now, Daddy, River finally said, her voice clear and light. I found us. The words hit Clara like sunlight after storm. Her knees weakened beneath her. Not from sorrow, but from something bigger, something overwhelming. Pride, love, the aching beauty of continuity. This was not the end of grief. It never would be, but it was the beginning of peace. She didn't cry until Kale stepped back and bowed his head. She's yours, he said softly, speaking toward the earth, but she walks with us. Clara felt the tears then, warm and slow. The kind that didn't sting, but healed. She looked at her daughter, small and strong and full of her father's quiet fire. And beside her stood two men who had not tried to replace Taza, but who had carried his memory forward in different ways. Gohan with his silent loyalty, Kale with his reverent grace. Together, they weren't a traditional family, but they were a true one. That night, they camped near the river. River curled between the two men as the fire crackled low. One of her arms slung across Gohan's chest, the other across Kale's. Like her little body understood something the world hadn't yet caught up to, that love. Real love is not about choosing one and forsaking the rest. It's about who shows up, who stays. Clara sat across the fire, watching them, her fingers tangled in a pine sprig. She remembered the first night Taza had brought her here. Before River was born, he told her that fire was never just heat. It was history, too. Do you think he knows? She asked, her voice soft in the flame's light. Gohan looked up, his gaze steady. I think he never left. Clara turned to Kale then. She calls you uncle now. He smiled. It's enough. She nodded and turned to Gohan. And she doesn't stop looking for your hand when she's scared. Gohan's eyes didn't change, but his posture softened. I won't let go. A silence fell between them, not heavy, not hesitant, just full, like a breath held between heartbeats. Clara leaned back on her hands and looked up at the stars. She felt Taza there, not like a ghost, not like a wound, but like a warmth in her chest that refused to go out. She had come to the canyon expecting pain, expecting the old ache to rip open. Instead, she found something else. She had handed him forward. River wasn't just remembered, she was named, claimed, loved, not because of blood alone, but because of the way people chose to hold her, to stand by her when the fever came, to carry her story beside their own. Taza had always said love wasn't a thing you kept. It was a thing you passed. Now Clara understood. As the stars wheeled slowly overhead, River mumbled in her sleep, I'm not afraid anymore. And Clara, with her arms resting gently around two men who had once been strangers, whispered back, neither am I.